When the new batch of images from Mars came through, it didn't seem like a big deal. Another data set, another calibration pass. Nothing about it suggested the kind of discovery that would make people stop talking mid-sentence. But the moment the first frame loaded, something looked off. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, almost quiet, a faint circular distortion in the thin Martian atmosphere, rippling outward from a single point. Before we go further, if you're one of those curious minds who finds comfort in these late-night mysteries, take a moment to like and share where you're listening from. I always find it fascinating how small the world feels when we talk about things this vast. Because what happened after that quiet pause is what started to change everything. At first, the team assumed it was glare. That's what everyone always says first. Maybe a reflection from the spacecraft's lens or an internal light echo. But when the same ripple appeared again, precisely synchronized with the brightness pulses from 3i Atlas, the room changed. The scientists didn't panic. They just stopped speaking. There's a kind of silence that happens in labs like that. A silence that says we know what this should look like, and it's not this. The pattern kept repeating. Every time the interstellar object flashed, Mars responded. Same interval, same intensity. It was like watching two instruments play the same note across space. They checked for transmission delays, sensor errors, electromagnetic interference. Nothing. The data was clean, completely clean. Then one of the analysts noticed something even stranger. The amplitude of each pulse was increasing slightly, as if Mars wasn't just reflecting light, it was amplifying it. That shouldn't be possible. The Martian surface is dust, rock, and iron oxide. It doesn't shine back. But the numbers showed otherwise. Something in that thin atmosphere was interacting with the incoming light and sending it back stronger than before. No one wanted to use the word communication, but it hung there unspoken in every look that passed across the monitors. The team didn't know what they were seeing, and that's the most dangerous kind of mystery, the kind that can be measured but not explained. By morning, NASA's data feed went quiet. No statement, no update, just an internal note. Transmission paused for review. That phrase always means the same thing. Someone, somewhere, decided it's better if people don't see what's coming through next. Hours after the feed went silent, smaller observatories began noticing odd fluctuations in their own data streams. The light from 3i Atlas wasn't fading the way a normal comet should. It was bending. Every few minutes the brightness dropped sharply, then recovered, like something massive was passing between the comet and the instruments recording it. But the timing didn't match any known orbital interference. It was irregular, almost patterned. A few independent researchers shared their data privately, comparing notes across time zones. When they plotted the fluctuations side by side, a rhythm appeared. Not perfectly regular, but close enough to suggest something deliberate. It looked like a repeating sequence. Short pulse, long pulse, pause, over and over. That's when the word signal began to appear in the back-channel messages, quietly, cautiously, the kind of word that could ruin a reputation if spoken in the wrong context. The official line remained cautious: natural resonance, dust interactions, thermal scattering, but none of those explanations fit the data. Something about the shape of the fluctuations was too organized, too intentional. Meanwhile, the missing NASA data reappeared, not on official servers, but in fragments posted anonymously to a small encrypted forum used by astronomers. The file names were stripped, the metadata erased. All that remained were the raw frames and their timestamps. And in those images, faint but unmistakable, was a new pattern forming near Mars's southern hemisphere. At first, it looked like aurora activity, faint arcs of light tracing along magnetic lines. But when overlaid with older images, those arcs didn't match any known magnetic field on Mars. They curved differently. They formed a lattice, almost geometric, like overlapping circles cut into the thin upper atmosphere. Every scientist who saw those images had the same reaction. They leaned closer, then further, then back again, because what they were seeing didn't make sense. The pattern was too consistent, repeating across every wavelength from visible to infrared. It wasn't reflection, it wasn't interference, it was design. Then came the leak. A message appeared on one of the encrypted channels. No name, no origin, just text. Frame 1172 wasn't corrupted, it was redacted. That line spread faster than any image. Within hours, half the astrophysics community was speculating about what could be hidden in that missing frame. No one admitted to having seen it, not publicly, but rumors began forming. Some claimed it showed motion, like a structure forming in orbit. Others said it was sound data, not visual. None of those claims were ever confirmed. But the one detail everyone agreed on was that 3I Atlas had changed. Its shape, once diffuse and irregular, now appeared sharper, narrower, more controlled, like it was evolving, and that's when the silence became impossible to ignore. NASA's monitoring pages still showed update timestamps, but every link redirected to placeholder files. The Deep Space Network logs stopped exactly at the moment the light pattern on Mars reached its brightest. Independent feeds went offline for maintenance. It was the same kind of coordinated blackout we'd seen only once before, during Oumuamua's close pass through the inner system. The pattern was repeating. Only this time the object wasn't moving away. It was staying close, and for the small group of astronomers still watching, that detail changed everything. Because if 3I Atlas wasn't just visiting, then it was already part of the solar system's rhythm. The story of Frame 1172 didn't fade away, it grew. Each day, more people claimed to have seen fragments of it before the data vanished. Most of those claims were probably noise, guesses built on rumors, but one stood out. It came from a small research team in southern Argentina, 3 radio astronomers who had been recording high-frequency telemetry from the Mars relay before the blackout. They weren't part of NASA. Their instruments were older, slower, but still tuned to the same band. When the official feed went dark, theirs kept running. For hours after the cut, they picked up a strange residual signal, weak, barely above the background hum. At first, they assumed it was bleed-through from an older data stream, but when they cleaned it up, they saw a repeating pulse buried in the noise. 5 bursts, a pause, then 3 more. 5, pause, 3, always the same. They tried matching it to any known communication pattern. Nothing fit, not telemetry, not error correction, not a satellite handshake. It was too clean, too patient. So they did something simple. They converted the amplitude into sound. It wasn't much, just a low, steady tone that faded in and out, like breathing through static. But once you heard it, it was hard to forget. It felt deliberate. The researchers didn't go public. They didn't have proof. But one of them, an older physicist named Calderon, shared the waveform with a few trusted colleagues. A day later, his accounts were locked. His shared folders, gone. The remaining 2 members of the team deleted their profiles within hours. That was the end of the trail, at least officially. But a few weeks later, that same waveform began circulating again. This time, it wasn't labeled or sourced. It was simply called the response. No metadata, no origin tags. Just an anonymous upload with a single note attached. Matched pattern detected in atmospheric reflection, 1172. People dismissed it at first. A hoax, another conspiracy file. But when spectrographic analysts lined it up against known datasets, the match was there. The pattern embedded in the sound was identical to the light pulses seen in the last visible images of 3I Atlas. That shouldn't be possible. Light and radio frequencies don't align like that naturally. You can make them match artificially, but it requires intent. A signal that says, "I know you're watching." No one in the field was willing to make that claim out loud. The language stayed cautious. Unexplained harmonic repetition, interband synchronization. But every scientist reading those words knew what they implied. Somewhere between Mars and deep space, something was responding across 2 mediums, light and sound, as if testing which one we'd notice first. It's hard to explain how that feels. You spend your life thinking of the universe as cold, vast, and unresponsive, and then suddenly it seems to blink back. Before we keep going, take a moment. If you're listening to this somewhere quiet, maybe the lights are low, maybe you're half asleep, think about what it would mean if that signal was intentional. A single pulse of light that carries an answer, not loud, not obvious. Just there, waiting. Because according to the latest analysis, that rhythm didn't stop. It's still repeating, faintly, every 41 minutes. And now, it's not just Mars reflecting it back. As days passed, The pulse no longer belonged to a single obscure dataset. It began appearing everywhere, quietly at first, a faint echo buried in deep space surveys from South Africa, in old spectrograms from Japanese radio telescopes, in atmospheric readings over Europe. The same rhythm, 5 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, always the same. None of these observatories were coordinated. They weren't looking for the pattern. They stumbled across it while checking other data. Some found it weeks late, buried in logs from long exposures. Others saw it live, blinking faintly on their screens, and each time it surfaced, the analysts went through the same motions, recheck the calibration, rule out local interference, confirm the source, and each time it held. By now, even cautious scientists were speaking more plainly. The words artifact and anomaly gave way to signal and pattern. Papers were written, not published, but passed hand to hand under embargo. Private chat rooms filled with debates. Was it atmospheric scatter, a cosmic ray artifact, a rogue satellite? No explanation fit the timing, the distribution, the persistence. What unsettled them most was the precision. Signals from natural sources wobble, drift, fade. This one didn't. It was steady, unwavering, as if whoever or whatever sent it was adjusting in real time to compensate for distance, rotation, and noise. And then something new happened. A graduate student at a university in Finland decided to overlay the pulse times against Earth's own magnetic fluctuations, a small, obscure dataset most astronomers never look at. The match was startling. Each major pulse from 3I Atlas coincided with subtle shifts in our planet's magnetic field, not big enough to notice in daily life, but measurable, repeating, like a heartbeat echoing across space. When the student posted the plot anonymously to a forum, it was dismissed at first. Correlation isn't causation. Patterns emerge from noise. But then a second team in Canada did the same test and found the same alignment, and then a third in Chile. Within days, the whispers changed tone. It wasn't just Mars responding. Something on Earth was vibrating in time with the pulses. No one wanted to say what that meant. No one wanted to suggest the signal wasn't just reaching us, but interacting with us. But that possibility hung in the air like static, humming just beyond the edge of language. Even the most conservative voices began to falter. One senior astronomer who'd built her career on debunking alien claims admitted, off record, that the data looked engineered. Not alien necessarily, but not random either, something purposeful. Meanwhile, images of 3I Atlas continued to arrive from small telescopes and amateur astronomers. The object's glow had sharpened. Its once uneven tail now streamed in 2 symmetrical plumes, curling like wings, and embedded within that glow were darker spots, not shadows, but voids, as if parts of the object were absorbing light entirely. When overlaid across multiple nights, those voids formed their own pattern, an evolving lattice, shifting slowly but maintaining a geometry unseen in comets or asteroids. To the naked eye, it was just a smear of faint light. To the algorithms, it was a changing code. In the absence of official guidance, the public filled the silence. Blogs posted elaborate theories. Some said 3I Atlas was a lost probe. Others said it was a natural body acting as a relay for something else. The words test and threshold appeared more often, as if we were being measured, not warned. But inside the quiet rooms where the real data lived, the mood had shifted from speculation to vigilance. People who had spent their lives staring at noise now sat a little straighter. They spoke more softly. They saved their files twice. They backed up their backups, because something about this signal felt like it was waiting. And then, without warning, the pulse stopped. Not faded, not weakened. Stopped. Everywhere at once, every telescope, every spectrograph, every station, silence. For 8 minutes, the readings flatlined. Then, a single burst, longer than before, and when the light returned, 3I Atlas was no longer where it had been. Its position had shifted subtly, impossibly, against its calculated trajectory. Not much, a few thousand kilometers off course, but enough to break the predictions, enough to say, I'm not a rock drifting through space, I am steering. Nobody announced that out loud, but across the world, in observatories big and small, people stared at their screens and understood the same thing at once. The visitor had moved on its own. If you're hearing this now, wherever you are, maybe at work, maybe under the night sky, maybe with your headphones on in bed, pause for a moment and imagine what that means. We spend our lives thinking of space as empty, indifferent, but what if it's not? What if the thing we've been watching all this time has been watching us back, waiting for the right moment to answer? And what if that moment has just begun? The shift in trajectory forced every observatory on Earth to recalculate. Predictive models that had worked perfectly for weeks suddenly failed. 3i Atlas wasn't following physics anymore, or rather, it was following physics we didn't yet understand. Within hours, data centers across the world were flooded with overlapping alerts. Automated scripts trying to update orbital paths started looping endlessly. NASA's public trackers froze. The European Space Agency quietly took their 3i Atlas page offline. And while official sources went quiet, independent ones came alive. In a small observatory outside Lisbon, a lone researcher named Duarte spent his night watching the comet's path against a star field he'd known for decades. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. His telescope wasn't strong enough to compete with the big institutions. But just after 3 a.m., his data feed froze for 6 seconds, then resumed with an error code he'd never seen before: frame offset mismatch. He thought it was a glitch until he opened the raw frames manually. In those 6 seconds, the stars behind 3i Atlas had shifted, not blurred, shifted, as though the light bending around the object had changed the very geometry of the space behind it. He ran the data twice, 3 times, then inverted it. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable, faint lines crossing through the distortion, forming a grid, perfectly symmetrical. Duarte wasn't the first to notice. Thousands of miles away, in Utah, another astronomer found the same thing. She overlaid her images on top of his, and the grids matched exactly, point for point. Different hemispheres, same structure. That's when a private data analyst in Tokyo decided to try something no one else had, converting the distortion map into a sound pattern. When he fed the brightness variations into a sonification program, the result was a slow, pulsing tone, haunting, low, and strangely familiar. It was the same rhythm that had echoed in radio frequencies weeks before. 5. Pause. 3. Only now, instead of a faint transmission, it was sculpted in light itself, a geometric resonance imprinted across interplanetary space. The realization hit like gravity. Whatever this was, it wasn't just sending a signal. It was shaping the medium around it to carry the same signature, and that's when the leaks began again. Encrypted fragments, small video clips, waveform screenshots, anonymous uploads to obscure corners of the web. Some contained timestamps referencing the missing NASA frame. Others had raw telemetry data tagged DC3I 1172. One, more chilling than the rest, appeared to show an encoded visual, a lattice of bright points slowly aligning into a spiral. The message seemed to evolve frame by frame, as though revealing itself in layers. But what truly unsettled everyone wasn't what it showed. It was what it mirrored. When overlaid against a topographic map of Earth's magnetic field, the spiral matched, almost perfectly. That single discovery spread like wildfire through private science channels. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. This wasn't just about observation. It was interaction, a mirror written in physics. The visitor's pattern wasn't random. It was responding to our planet's magnetic pulse, shaping itself to it. Scientists called it synchronization. The public called it acknowledgement. At first, the pattern held steady, orbiting near Mars, oscillating gently, pulsing every 41 minutes. But then, the signal narrowed. The pulses became shorter, sharper, cleaner. They weren't wide broadcasts anymore. They were targeted, aimed directly at specific points in space. One of those points was Earth. The first to confirm it was an old deep space relay antenna in Australia, one of the few still operating in full manual mode. The signal arrived there first, faint but distinct. Its phase shift aligned perfectly with Earth's orbit, as if timed to intercept us. No message followed, no language, no words. Just a burst of precision energy that mapped neatly against the upper ionosphere, and then vanished. The world didn't hear it. Most people never will. But those who saw the raw numbers knew instantly what it meant. It wasn't a broadcast anymore. It was a handshake. If you're listening to this now, imagine looking up at the night sky and knowing that somewhere out there, something has adjusted its course just slightly. Not by accident, not by drift, but because it saw you first. That's where 3i Atlas stands tonight, silent, hovering between Mars and the void, its light steady but not still. And for the first time, our instruments aren't just recording, they're waiting. Within a week of the first targeted pulse, strange readings began showing up in unexpected places. Weather satellites orbiting Earth started registering faint fluctuations in the ionosphere, too small to cause concern, but precise enough to raise eyebrows. It wasn't the kind of disturbance that came from solar winds or geomagnetic storms. This was subtler, repeating at exactly the same 41-minute interval as the pulse from 3i Atlas. And yet, by all known laws, there was no way for that pulse to travel this far, this cleanly, through so many layers of interference. At first, the data was dismissed as coincidence, until it appeared again in recordings from a balloon probe launched over Antarctica. The probe's sensors detected faint electromagnetic oscillations rippling through the thin upper air, invisible to human senses but rhythmic, structured, and when the readings were translated into sound, they carried the same strange heartbeat as before. 5 beats, pause, 3 beats. Scientists who had never believed in patterns began printing their logs and studying them in silence. They ran tests, compared timestamps, measured background noise. The conclusion they kept arriving at, reluctantly, quietly, was that whatever was pulsing near Mars was now imprinting itself faintly across our atmosphere. But how? That question haunted a small group of researchers at a private institute in Sweden. Their director, a woman named Linnea Rask, had spent most of her career studying how plasma waves move through planetary magnetospheres. When she plotted the new data, she saw something strange. The pulses weren't just random electrical ripples. They aligned with points in the magnetic grid, the invisible pathways that connect the poles to the equator. It was as though the Earth itself was echoing something, not receiving a signal, but answering it. Her team decided to simulate the interaction in a controlled environment. They built a model of the magnetosphere, fed in the recorded pulses, and amplified the response. For 3 minutes, nothing happened. Then the readings spiked. A new waveform appeared, one that didn't exist in the original data. It was softer, smoother, with a slight lag. A reply, not a reflection. Something in the model was generating a response of its own. They repeated the test 5 times. Each time, the same echo appeared, shifting slightly in shape, as though adapting. By the 5th run, Linnea sat back and whispered, "It's learning." No one in the room laughed. They didn't report their results. Instead, they encrypted the files and sent them quietly to colleagues in Norway and Canada. Within a day, both teams confirmed the same anomaly. The echo was real. Meanwhile, the public narrative remained calm. NASA maintained that the Mars object, they had stopped using the name 3i Atlas, was now inactive. News networks moved on to other stories, but among the global astronomy community, silence returned. Not the kind of silence born of ignorance, the kind that comes when too many people know too much. Then came the file. An encrypted packet delivered to Linnea's private server from an untraceable source. It contained a single compressed folder labeled Return Sequence. Inside were waveform charts, time-stamped images, and one short note. "If you run the echo in reverse, you'll see what we saw." It took her team 6 hours to decode it. When they finally played the reversed signal through a spectrogram, the waveform unfolded into light, faint pulsing bands that, when stacked together, formed an image. Not random static, not noise. It was the same geometric lattice seen in Duarte's telescope data, only this time the pattern wasn't drifting in space. It was centered, expanding outward. For the first time, it looked alive. The discovery broke something quiet in every scientist who saw it. They didn't call it proof. They didn't call it anything. They just stared at the screen and realized that whatever 3i Atlas was, it wasn't a visitor anymore. It was part of a system, a network reaching across space and atmosphere, binding 2 worlds through rhythm and resonance, and that was before the lights flickered. Every monitor in the lab blinked twice, then went dark. No power surge, no alarm, just a clean shutdown. Backup generators didn't kick in. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. When the power finally returned, all the files were gone. No backup, no trace. Only one thing remained on Linnea's terminal, a single untitled document containing 8 characters, 5, 3, 55353. She stared at it for a long time before whispering, "It's still talking." For a few days, nothing happened. The data feeds went back to normal. No new pulses, no echoes. It almost felt like the story had ended quietly, the way space stories usually do. Not with a bang, but with silence. And then, around the world, the sky began to change. It started over the Pacific. A faint, slow shimmer high above the clouds, first mistaken for aurora. But the colors were wrong. Instead of the usual green and violet, these waves rippled in deep golden tones, like light passing through water. Pilots flying over the region reported seeing patterns form within the glow. Faint circular bands that expanded outward, then vanished again. Hours later, similar reports came from northern Canada, then from southern Chile. The phenomenon wasn't restricted to one hemisphere. It moved, following a rhythm that, once plotted, matched perfectly with the old 3i Atlas pulse. At first, scientists thought it was an atmospheric reaction, sunlight refracting through charged particles left behind by some unseen solar event. But solar activity was calm. The sun hadn't produced a flare in weeks. There was no known reason for Earth's upper air to behave that way. Yet every few hours, the same silent ripple passed across the sky. And when instruments tracked the timing of those waves, they noticed something else. The pulse was accelerating, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but enough that every cycle arrived a few seconds sooner than the last. Whatever was happening near Mars wasn't staying there. Linnea's team, working quietly from backup drives, reassembled what little data they had before the blackout. Using archived recordings of the reversed signal, they managed to project the lattice pattern over a 3D model of Earth's magnetosphere. The fit was exact. Every line of that cosmic geometry corresponded to a known magnetic boundary, the same invisible lines that shape auroras and guide particles across the poles. The structure wasn't random, it was following the planet's pulse, wrapping around it like a second skin. "It's adjusting," one of her students whispered. "Or synchronizing," Linnea replied. And then, just before dawn, something new appeared. A satellite belonging to the Japanese weather agency recorded a faint flash above the Pacific. Not lightning, not a meteor, but a soft burst of luminescence spreading across hundreds of miles. When the footage was enhanced, the glow revealed faint arcs intersecting at clean geometric angles, lines, circles, spirals. To anyone else, it looked like a coincidence, clouds catching the last light of the setting sun. But to Linnea, it looked familiar, the same lattice seen around Mars, now faintly etched into Earth's sky. She tried to contact her colleagues. No response. Networks lagged. Files failed to upload. Whatever was happening, it was already interfering with communication systems in subtle ways. Satellite data lagged behind real time by several minutes. And during those gaps, faint distortions crept into every frame, as if something was rewriting the transmission mid-air. Then, over the course of one night, the distortions changed shape. They stopped being random static. They started to form patterns again. 5 pulses. Pause. 3. But this time, the glow wasn't only visible in satellites. People saw it from the ground. In the still hours before dawn, over coastlines and cities, a faint rhythm of light appeared at the edge of the sky. Slow, deliberate, pulsing in silence. News outlets hesitated to cover it. Official statements called it upper atmospheric interference. But on social media, clips spread faster than any explanation. Everyone was seeing it. The same sequence, the same golden shimmer that seemed to hum across the world. And then, as if confirming what everyone feared, the European Space Agency's Mars Relay Station released one final image before going offline again. 3i Atlas was no longer near Mars. It had moved, not closer to the Sun, closer to Earth. The updated coordinates placed it on a slow inward curve, one that, if unaltered, would bring it into Earth's orbital path within 3 months. No one made a public statement. No one had to. For the first time in history, the night sky wasn't something we were looking into. It was something looking back. And as the pulse quickened, matching the rhythm of our planet's own magnetic breath, humanity's oldest fear, that we are being observed, became something quieter, stranger, and infinitely harder to ignore. Because the silence that follows recognition is the loudest sound of all. By the 3rd week, the shimmering had settled into rhythm. It wasn't random anymore. The light ripples in the upper atmosphere followed a precise pattern that repeated across the planet every 41 minutes. The same heartbeat, now unmistakably synchronized with 3I Atlas. But something else began to change. In the polar regions, instruments started to pick up subtle distortions in the magnetic field, small, localized twists, not storms, not flares, but geometric deviations forming briefly, then fading again. They appeared near the poles first, then began showing up farther south. In the beginning, no one noticed. The changes were too small, just a few nanoteslas off the normal baseline. But when visualized, the distortions formed perfect circles, like ripples expanding outward from a single point deep beneath the Earth's crust. That's when researchers realized the timing. Each anomaly formed exactly 12 minutes after one of the sky pulses. Every time light rippled through the atmosphere, the ground beneath answered, a magnetic whisper rising through rock and metal, too faint for the human body to sense, but measurable to machines. And then, reports began to surface from the field. A team of geophysicists stationed in Antarctica noticed something strange with their equipment. Their compass arrays, ultra-sensitive sensors meant to monitor magnetic drift, began to oscillate on their own. Not wildly, just a slow, repeating sway, as though being gently tugged by some unseen rhythm. At first they assumed local interference, but when they synchronized their recordings with pulse data from orbit, the pattern matched exactly. The Earth wasn't just echoing the signal anymore, it was moving with it. Back in Sweden, Linnea and her remaining team watched the data flood in. They didn't sleep much anymore. Every new set of readings came with more confirmation. The signal was interacting directly with the planet's magnetic shell, not attacking, not disrupting, harmonizing. She began to wonder aloud what it meant to be synchronized, whether this was communication or calibration. Was 3I Atlas teaching the planet to respond, or was it simply listening, waiting for resonance to align perfectly? The answer came, in part, from a place she didn't expect. A weather station in Iceland began picking up radio interference so consistent that technicians mistook it for a local broadcast. But when they isolated the frequency, it wasn't speech, it was tone. Low, layered frequencies stacked in harmonic intervals, the same ones observed in the pulse pattern. Someone fed that data into a 3D spectrogram and saw something incredible. The frequencies weren't random, they formed spirals, matching the same geometry observed around Mars. It was as though the same invisible structure now hovered faintly above Earth, carried in magnetism instead of light. When Linnea saw the render, she felt an odd calm. For weeks, fear had been the only rational emotion. But seeing that pattern, elegant, ordered, pulsing in quiet harmony with the planet itself, it didn't feel hostile. It felt intentional. Not as if something had arrived to conquer or invade, but as if something was establishing a connection, testing the limits of how far a message could travel without words. Her assistant broke the silence first. "What if it's not contacting us?" he said softly. "What if it's contacting the planet?" Linnea looked up from her console. The thought hung in the air, impossible and yet undeniably logical. Every change, every pulse, every harmonic shift, it all centered on resonance, not communication. If 3I Atlas was trying to talk, maybe humanity wasn't the listener, maybe Earth was. For the first time in her career, Linnea had no hypothesis to test, no formula to apply. She simply stared at the sky on her monitor, a calm, glowing rhythm of golden light sweeping silently across the world, and whispered, "Maybe we were never the signal's destination." That line would never appear in a paper, but among those who saw the same data, it became an unspoken truth. Because if the signal wasn't meant for us, then we were simply witnesses to a conversation older, deeper, and far more intelligent than we'd ever imagined. And as night fell again over the poles, the lights in the sky pulsed once more. 5. Pause. 3. Reflecting softly in the snow like a heartbeat beneath glass. Somewhere out there, the visitor was listening, and somewhere below, the planet seemed to answer. By now the rhythm of the sky had become familiar, so familiar in fact, that many had begun to ignore it. Like background music in a long dream, the light pulses had blended into routine. Every 41 minutes, faint golden bands rippled through the upper atmosphere, sweeping from pole to pole like a silent tide. But one night, everything changed. It began in the quiet hours before dawn over the South Atlantic. A cluster of satellite sensors recorded a faint glow, not in the sky, but within it. Not an aurora, not a reflection, but something suspended halfway between the stratosphere and space. A filament, thin and luminous, stretching for hundreds of kilometers before fading into the dark. For hours, no one noticed. Then a ground-based telescope in Chile caught the same phenomenon, magnified, thin threads of light weaving through the upper air, bending ever so slightly as though tracing invisible paths. At first, it seemed random, but when the footage was enhanced, the threads formed arcs, faint, curved patterns that mirrored the same geometric lattice first seen around Mars. It wasn't just the light anymore, it was structure. The atmospheric particles themselves were aligning, vibrating in unison with the incoming pulse. It was as if the Earth's upper air had become a canvas, and the signal was now painting across it. Linnea's team had been expecting something, though not this. She'd spent days mapping the pulse against atmospheric data, convinced that the resonance would eventually produce a visible side effect, perhaps subtle weather shifts, maybe electrical halos near the poles. But this was different. The patterns weren't chaotic. They were stable, deliberate, flowing with slow precision as though guided by an unseen hand. Each wave of light carried its own microstructure, smaller ripples within the larger arcs, forming repeating mathematical ratios. When translated into frequency, the numbers came out elegant, golden ratio harmonics recurring in sequence. Nature rarely arranges itself so neatly unless driven by an external force. She whispered to her team, almost afraid to believe it. It's sculpting the air. Hours later, as the data spread quietly through the small network of observatories still tracking the phenomenon, more confirmations arrived. Australia, Greenland, Mongolia. Every location recorded faint traces of the same glowing filaments, thin lattices of energy suspended above the clouds, invisible by day but hauntingly visible by night. Some began calling them light veins. Others called them atmospheric threads, but to the scientists who saw the data firsthand, there was no metaphor, only structure, and structure by definition means design. The phenomenon deepened when pilots flying through high-altitude corridors began reporting flickers outside their cockpits, flashes that seemed to twist away when approached. Radar showed nothing, but sensors registered minute temperature fluctuations, as though the air itself had been momentarily rearranged. Meanwhile, satellites in low orbit captured something extraordinary. Between two pulses, the filaments didn't vanish entirely. They bent, forming arcs that connected across hemispheres, massive, slow-moving bridges of faint plasma drifting just beyond the reach of the atmosphere. For the first time, the geometry wasn't just local, it was global. Every pulse seemed to tighten the network, bringing the lattice closer to coherence, like threads being drawn into a single woven pattern. Linnea stared at the composite map her team generated, lines of golden light wrapping around the planet, converging at multiple points near the equator. Those convergent zones pulsed brightest, each one aligned perfectly with regions of high magnetic flux. "It's choosing anchor points," she murmured. Her assistant frowned. "For what?" "I don't know," she said. "Maybe it's not us, it's anchoring to." That night, while the world slept beneath the shimmering sky, the light pulses changed again. For the first time there was variation, a longer burst, then a brief gap, then two shorter flashes. 5, pause, 3, then a new rhythm. When the sequence repeated a second time, the difference was obvious. The signal wasn't broadcasting anymore, it was evolving, as though the visitor had finally received an answer. Linnea wrote in her log that night, "The planet is resonating, the geometry has stabilized, we may no longer be observing a signal, but a connection." And for the first time since 3i Atlas entered the system, she didn't look toward Mars for data, she looked upward, toward the quiet, pulsing sky, and wondered if the answer had already arrived. The convergences didn't stay still for long. Within days, the luminous intersections began to drift. Not far, just a few degrees at a time, like tides shifting beneath invisible gravity. Every move corresponded with fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, but those changes were no longer subtle. Compasses near the equator started to misalign by fractions of a degree, twitching with the same rhythm as the light above. At first, researchers thought it was coincidence, magnetic anomalies caused by the ionospheric disturbances. But when atomic clocks across separate observatories began to show discrepancies, the truth became harder to ignore. Time itself had started to stretch. The shifts were microscopic, milliseconds at most, but synchronized perfectly with the light pulses. Every time the golden shimmer rippled through the atmosphere, the local time signal lagged, then caught up again. Not enough to affect daily life, but enough to tell physicists that space around Earth was no longer behaving like empty space. Something was subtly bending it. When the data reached Linnea's team, the lab fell silent. The readings from Greenland, Chile, and Japan all matched. A rhythmic global micro-distortion, consistent across every clock, every coordinate. If it had happened once, they could have blamed solar interference. But it was happening continuously, always within seconds of each pulse. "It's impossible," her assistant whispered. "No," Linnea said softly. "It's precise." They mapped the lag pattern across the globe. The delays formed a spiral, the same shape seen in the atmospheric lattice, winding slowly around the planet's equator. At its center was one of the strongest magnetic convergence zones, the same region that had glowed brightest in the satellite images. And then something remarkable happened. Seismic sensors in the Andes recorded what they first thought was a distant tremor. But when they analyzed the waveform, it wasn't an earthquake. The vibration was too uniform, too clean, spreading not through rock, but through the air itself. The planet was humming. The tone was deep, inaudible to human ears, but measurable. A standing wave encircling the globe, repeating at the same 41-minute interval. It was as though the Earth had joined the chorus, singing softly back into the void. Across the scientific community, private discussions grew quieter. No one wanted to be the first to say it aloud, that a visitor from deep space was now in resonance with an entire world. But the evidence was there, line by line, chart by chart, the harmony between pulse, light, and matter. And all the while, 3I Atlas hovered just beyond Mars's orbit, unmoving yet impossibly dynamic, its shape sharpening with each passing week. Observations from amateur astronomers showed that its tail was no longer dissipating, it was retracting, curling inward as though folding back on itself, not decaying, transforming. Linnea watched one of those videos in the early hours of the morning. She slowed it down frame by frame, watching the tail condense into a single glowing strand, then split into 3 distinct arcs, forming a triangle of faint light. Her pulse quickened. That triangle wasn't random. It matched the geometric alignment of the 3 brightest convergent zones now shimmering in Earth's sky. 3 arcs above Mars, 3 arcs on Earth, both pulsing to the same rhythm. "This isn't interaction anymore," she said quietly. "It's synchronization." Her assistant leaned forward. "Synchronization to what?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because deep down, a realization was forming, one that terrified her more than anything else. Synchronization implies a system, and systems need sources. If Earth was now resonating, it meant something else was driving the signal. Not a coincidence, not background noise, but an origin. A single controlling rhythm threading through light, magnetism, and time. When Linnea ran a projection forward based on the current acceleration rate, her screen filled with a quiet, graceful spiral expanding outward, first past Mars, then into the asteroid belt, then into open space. The shape looked almost like a fingerprint. "Maybe," she whispered, "this isn't the beginning of a visit. Maybe it's the completion of one." Outside, the auroral shimmer swept slowly across the sky again, painting the horizon in soft gold and violet. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, as though every mountain, ocean, and molecule of air was listening. Then faintly, the hum deepened, not loud, not threatening, just steady. And beneath it, for the first time, the pulse split. 5, pause, 3, then 2. A new rhythm, a message evolving in real time. The next change came from the oceans. For weeks, the lights had stayed above the sky, untouchable, a distant shimmer no closer than the edge of the atmosphere. But one morning, satellites began to detect faint electromagnetic reflections coming from the surface of the Pacific. At first, it looked like noise, sunlight scattered by waves, interference from coastal transmitters, but the timing was too perfect. Every reflection aligned precisely with the rhythm of the global pulse. The first to confirm it was a marine observatory off the coast of Chile. Their instruments, built to study deep ocean currents, picked up faint surges of electrical activity running parallel to the incoming waves. These surges didn't follow the wind or the tides. They followed the rhythm of 3I Atlas. At low frequency, the pattern traveled thousands of kilometers, sweeping through the water column like invisible currents of thought. It didn't disturb the sea life, didn't shift the tides. It simply was, a subtle oscillation threading through the planet's largest body of water. Soon, other stations reported the same thing. The Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, even the polar seas. Everywhere the waves met, the pulse passed through, quiet, measured, almost gentle. When Linnea received the first compiled oceanic data set, she stared at the screen for almost an hour. The waveform wasn't random. It formed a perfect harmonic with the one recorded in the atmosphere, the same golden ratio pattern now mirrored below the surface. The visitor's resonance had reached the deep. That night, the sky above the equator began to shimmer again, not in arcs this time, but in spirals, faint and luminous, slowly rotating like galaxies drawn in light. And when the spiral aligned with a major convergence zone over the Pacific, something new happened. The water below glowed, not brightly, just a soft phosphorescence, spreading across the surface like a breath. It began as a faint trace, barely visible to the human eye, then expanded outward, tracing vast, luminous circles that pulsed in harmony with the light above. 5 beats. Pause. 3, 2. Satellite footage showed no ships, no aircraft, just the ocean responding, calmly, rhythmically, to something it seemed to recognize. On shore, night fishermen noticed the change first. They said the sea felt alive. Their compasses spun slowly in their hands, then steadied. Radio static rose and fell in time with the waves, and far above, 3I Atlas continued to glow, its structure now sharper than ever, the faint golden arcs folding inward, as though focusing. Linnea's assistant watched the live feed from a satellite over the Indian Ocean. "What if this is the handshake?" he whispered. Linnea didn't answer right away. She just watched as the spirals tightened, each one moving closer toward a single global center, a point hovering directly over the intersection of Earth's magnetic equator and prime meridian. "Handshakes end," she said softly. "This looks like something beginning." Then, as if in answer, a subtle resonance filled the air. Every barometer across the equator registered a tiny fluctuation. Not pressure, frequency. The very air was humming. Not loud enough to hear, not strong enough to shake glass, just enough that those standing near the sea claimed they could feel it in their bones, like a whisper inside the body. And for the first time, the signal no longer felt like it was coming from space. It felt like it was coming through the planet. Linnea checked the real-time graph one last time before saving it to her external drive. The pattern looping on her monitor was unlike any before. A complete waveform, smooth, infinite, balanced between air and sea. She didn't know what it meant, but deep down she felt certain it wasn't a warning, it was an arrival. Within days, reports began to multiply. Across the world, from Iceland to Indonesia, observers noticed faint geometric shapes appearing within the night sky, patterns too precise to dismiss as natural auroras. In Alaska, the green veil of the aurora folded into hexagonal rings. In Egypt, faint red filaments arched across the desert horizon, forming repeating tessellations, like ripples caught in frozen motion. And in South America, long bands of blue-white light wound together, pulsing with the same rhythm seen in the oceans. 5, pause, 3, 2. At first, scientists assumed it was coincidence, optical effects of solar wind interacting with Earth's changing magnetic field. But then, a group of researchers from Kyoto University noticed something different. When people looked directly at the aurora, the rhythm shifted, not dramatically, but perceptibly. The pulse quickened for a few seconds, then slowed again, as if acknowledging attention. Word spread fast. Forums filled with night sky watchers claiming they could feel the rhythm when they focused on the light. Many described it as a subtle vibration behind their eyes, a heartbeat not their own. The data from biofeedback monitors confirmed something odd. Participants' heart rates synced briefly to the same interval as the light pulses. It was as if the planet's new resonance had found a way to speak through biology. Linnea stayed awake 3 nights straight, watching satellite feeds of the auroras shifting across the globe. When she slowed one of the recordings, she saw the impossible, each geometric pattern forming for a few moments, then dissolving, not randomly, but in a sequence that repeated every 23 minutes. When plotted on a coordinate map, the dissolved shapes revealed a spiral, identical to the pattern seen earlier in the atmosphere and to the tail formation of 3I Atlas itself. Only now, the spiral wasn't expanding, it was closing. As the nights passed, the light structures grew clearer, brighter, more deliberate. Astronomers in Hawaii described a luminous lattice above the Pacific, thin filaments glowing like veins in the darkness, connecting one horizon to another. Each pulse rolled through it like breath, and for those watching from the ground, the sense of scale became almost unbearable. It wasn't just beauty anymore, it was geometry in motion, purposeful geometry. Then, something extraordinary happened. During one of the synchronized auroral waves, the lights formed a pattern not seen before, a near-perfect circle, 3,000 kilometers wide, centered directly above Mars's equator. At that exact moment, instruments across Earth registered a mirrored formation in the upper atmosphere, a circle of identical proportion, faintly visible from orbit. It wasn't random alignment, it was reflection. Whatever 3I Atlas was doing near Mars, Earth was now echoing it, perfectly, rhythm for rhythm, structure for structure. Linnea's assistant watched the twin feeds side by side. "It's like they're staring at each other," he murmured. She nodded, unable to speak. Because on both screens the circle wasn't just stable, it was pulsing. Each pulse alternated between the two worlds. First Mars, then Earth. A signal travelling not through radio waves, but through resonance itself. A communication written in the geometry of light. By dawn, word had reached independent astronomers everywhere. The auroral circle above Earth was fading, but something even more astonishing had appeared in its place. A faint vertical column of light stretching from the upper atmosphere straight into the dark. A luminous bridge connecting sky to space. Spectral analysis showed it wasn't plasma or cloud or dust. It was pure energy, coherent and stable, a filament carrying the same electromagnetic signature as 3I Atlas. And then came the realization that froze every scientist who saw it. The filament wasn't pointing outward, it was pointing upward, straight toward the coordinates of Mars. For the first time, humanity was no longer just observing 3I Atlas. We were tethered to it. The rhythm that began as a hum had become a link, a pulse uniting two worlds, carrying information neither side had yet deciphered. But whatever it wasn't random. It was intentional. For nearly 2 days, the luminous column remained steady, a thin, vertical thread connecting Earth's upper atmosphere to deep space. At first, the scientific community was cautious, hesitant to call it what it looked like, communication. But as data from observatories, satellites, and ground-based sensors began to synchronize, a pattern started to emerge, a precise modulation buried within the beam. Every 23 minutes, the intensity of the filament shifted through a sequence of distinct amplitudes. 5 pulses. Pause. 3. 2. At first, it seemed random, just the same rhythm repeating again. But when Linnea's team overlaid the waveform data from Earth's atmosphere against the electromagnetic oscillations measured near Mars, they saw something extraordinary. Each pulse was mirrored, offset by just 0.17 seconds, a delay consistent with light-speed transmission between the two planets. The realization struck her like a heartbeat. The delay wasn't lag, it was dialogue. For the first time, it seemed as though the beam itself was exchanging information, not broadcasting, but conversing. At the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a separate analysis confirmed it. The pulse amplitudes were not arbitrary. Their ratios followed a clear mathematical sequence. Prime numbers interlaced with harmonic frequencies corresponding to hydrogen's spectral lines. It was as if the signal was referencing the fundamental building blocks of the universe. Scientists across the world tried to decode it. Some saw geometry, some saw sound, others insisted it was language, an introduction, or perhaps an acknowledgement, but every theory led to the same unsettling truth. This was structured communication far beyond natural coincidence. As the beam persisted, something else began to happen. Instruments on Earth started to record minute changes in local gravity, not strong enough to affect structures or tides, but measurable. Each pulse seemed to slightly alter the curvature of spacetime, a ripple of compression and release, oscillating in perfect sync with the beam. To some, it looked like data transmission. To others, a form of resonance-based scanning, as though the planet itself was being read like a vast archive. Linnea stared at the data visualization on her monitor, transfixed. The waveform resembled a heartbeat. The intervals were biological, the symmetry too deliberate. For hours, she sat silently, comparing the rhythm to everything from whale songs to neuronal signals. And then she saw it, a repeating pattern buried deep within the signal's modulation. When converted to frequency space, the sequence formed a spiral identical to the one seen in the auroras, the ocean currents, and even the earlier atmospheric maps. But this spiral wasn't static, it was rotating, slowly, precisely, and every rotation aligned with the orbit of Mars. "This isn't just a signal," she murmured. "It's a structure." Her assistant looked over. "A structure of what?" Linnea hesitated. "Of intention." Outside, the sky above the equator shimmered faintly again. To the naked eye, it looked like an ordinary night. No beam, no patterns, no glow. But satellites caught what human eyes could not. Subtle bands of light moving outward from the beam's origin, expanding like ripples in a pond. Each ripple carried a faint, repeating variation in brightness, a modulation that, when slowed down, revealed something shocking. The fluctuations matched human neural oscillations almost perfectly, the same rhythmic frequencies that pulse through the brain during dreaming. At first, it seemed like an impossible coincidence. But when EEG monitors from volunteers across multiple continents began showing synchronized spikes during the pulse intervals, coincidence became the least likely explanation. Whatever was happening, the signal wasn't just interacting with the atmosphere or the oceans anymore. It was interacting with consciousness. Linnea sat in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the lab's cooling fans. She stared at the waveform, feeling an odd calm spread through her. Not fear, not awe, just a kind of recognition. Like hearing a melody she'd known all her life, finally played back in full. And for the first time since the silence from NASA began, she whispered what every scientist had been avoiding. "What if this isn't them talking to us?" Her assistant frowned. "Then what? What if this is us, talking back?" Outside, the beam flared once more. 5 pulses. Pause. 3, 2. Then, for the briefest moment, a final flicker. A 6th pulse that didn't belong, as if the pattern itself had just learned a new word. At first it was only numbers on screens, readouts, waveforms, plots. But as the days passed, the phenomenon began to slip quietly into ordinary lives. People who had never heard of 3i Atlas started reporting vivid, almost lucid dreams, glowing lattices, spirals of light, shapes they couldn't name, farmers in Argentina, nurses in Seoul, students in Norway. The same imagery surfaced across continents, like a hidden gallery opening in the human mind. Sleep researchers, skeptical at first, began comparing notes. The dreams shared an uncanny timing. They peaked within minutes of the beam's pulse intervals. EEG readings from volunteer sleepers showed spikes of synchronized brainwave activity, not random bursts but patterns echoing the same 5-3-2 rhythm detected in the signal. Linnea watched the data compile in real time, each new entry filling the map with pinpoints of light. It looked like the Earth was stargazing inward, dreaming the same dream all at once. The pattern had started in the oceans, in the sky, in the electromagnetic field, and now it was inside consciousness itself. She tried to explain it to her assistant. "It's like, the signal isn't broadcasting to us," she said softly. "It's inviting us to resonate." Her assistant frowned. "Like a tuning fork?" "Exactly. And now the fork is ringing inside us." Meanwhile, outside the lab, subtle changes crept into the world. People reported an unexplainable sense of calm when the pulses passed, as though their bodies knew a rhythm they had forgotten. Long-forgotten memories bubbled up in dreams. Some woke with equations scribbled on scraps of paper, claiming they'd seen them in the sky. Psychologists warned of mass suggestion, but the patterns persisted even among those who had no access to news, no internet, no idea what 3-Eye Atlas was. The effect was global, impartial, unforced. One night, Linnea stood on the roof of the observatory watching the stars tremble faintly in their positions. For the first time, she felt the hum in her own chest, a vibration softer than breath but undeniable, threading her heartbeat into the pulse overhead. In that moment, the mystery stopped being distant. It felt intimate. Down below, the oceans glowed faintly again. High above, the auroras coiled into spirals tighter than ever before. Between them, the beam held steady, its rhythm unchanged, as though waiting for the world to notice something obvious. Her assistant broke the silence. "What if this is how it's always been? We just never measured it before." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because she was thinking the same thing. What if the visitor wasn't an intruder, but a mirror, revealing a resonance that had always been hidden, now awakened by its passing? The pulse flared once more. 5, pause, 3, 2. Then, for the first time, a subtle shift in the tone. Not a new pulse, not a new shape, but a sense, felt by thousands at once. A low, almost melodic note, humming at the edge of perception. Around the world, people woke from their dreams at the same instant, sitting up with the same whispered word on their lips. A word they'd never learned but somehow recognized. And though no one could say it aloud, everyone who felt it knew. This was no longer observation, it was connection. By the time the next cycle began, the beam had stabilized into a constant shimmer, a thread of gold running from horizon to sky. It didn't flicker anymore, it breathed. The light rose and fell with a rhythm now familiar to anyone who had watched long enough. 5, pause, 3, 2. But now, for the first time, the air itself was answering. Atmospheric sensors in multiple countries began to register low-frequency vibrations that weren't part of the incoming signal. At first, they seemed like echoes, harmless feedback caused by ionized particles in the upper atmosphere. But when the data was plotted, it revealed something impossible. The echoes were arriving before the next pulse, as if the planet itself had started anticipating the rhythm. Linnea and her team stared at the waveform, speechless. Each new pulse from the beam was now preceded by a faint harmonic ripple, Earth's own atmospheric resonance adjusting a fraction of a second earlier every time. It wasn't random noise, it was call and response. To test it, Linnea did something simple. She had the team project an artificial frequency into the ionosphere, a clean, low hum generated from the observatory's transmitters, just beneath the beam's range. If the signal was truly reactive, it would adjust, and it did. Within minutes, the pulse widened by a measurable degree, its amplitude shifting to accommodate the injected tone, as though recognizing the reply and tuning itself closer. Not overpowering, not dominant, collaborative. The team watched in stunned silence as the two frequencies began to braid together, oscillating in perfect symmetry. When the sequence stabilized, the spectrograph showed a waveform unlike anything they'd ever recorded. The two frequencies merged into one harmonic, balanced, self-sustaining, impossibly pure. The system was no longer separate, it was unified. News of the event spread quietly among the observatories. Those listening on low-band receivers reported the same thing. The hum that once sounded distant now carried over the horizon, faint but unmistakable. A planetary tone resonating across oceans, mountains, and sky. At that same moment, atmospheric imaging captured something extraordinary. High above the beam's origin point, thin layers of cirrus clouds began to form concentric circles, each one glowing faintly along its edge. The formation expanded outward, crossing continents, wrapping the globe in a soft, spectral halo. No one had ever seen a weather pattern behave like this. The clouds didn't move with the wind. They drifted with the pulse. For an instant, satellites caught a reflection from the opposite side of the planet, a mirrored halo forming directly above the beam's projected exit point in space. Two halos, two faces of one resonance. Earth shimmering like a living prism between them. Linnea's assistant whispered, "It's like it's tuning us." She nodded slowly. "Or maybe," she said, "we were already in tune." It's just finishing the song. At that same hour, thousands of people around the world began hearing a faint hum in moments of stillness, a tone that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some said it was comforting, others said it was the sound of the sky breathing. For Linnea, it was something else entirely. It was the sound of balance, of two systems, human and cosmic, finally speaking the same language. And as she watched the waveform settle into perfect symmetry, she couldn't help but feel that this was never about invasion or observation or even warning. It was about recognition. Something ancient in the pattern of life and gravity had simply woken up, and now, for the first time, it was listening back. In the following days, the light of the sky itself began to shift. Not dramatically, no explosions, no apocalyptic glare, but subtly, gracefully, as if the very air was remembering how to glow. At first, it was the color of twilight that seemed different. The usual soft blues and oranges deepened into something almost metallic, a hue between silver and rose that no camera could quite capture. Astronomers described it as atmospheric scattering, a rare refraction caused by microparticles aligning to the beam's field, but people who simply looked up didn't use those words. They said it felt like the world was exhaling. The transition from day to night grew slower, gentler, the sunset stretching longer, the stars arriving earlier, the darkness never entirely black. Even under cloud cover there was light now, a faint shifting luminescence that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the pulse. 5. Pause. 3. 2. It was as if the planet had learned to keep time. Linnea stood outside the observatory, her breath fogging in the cool evening air, watching the western horizon shimmer. The auroras that had once danced near the poles now extended far south, forming thin veils across the temperate skies. Not bright curtains like before, faint, luminous threads that seemed to trace invisible geometries in the dark. When she tilted her head, she could see them forming spirals that echoed the beam's structure, vast loops of light bending in directions that defied the wind. Each new arc aligned perfectly with the resonant zones they had charted weeks before. To those watching, it was mesmerizing. Cities began dimming their lights at night just to see it, a quiet global ritual of observation, as if the species had rediscovered reverence. No one spoke of fear anymore, they simply watched. But the scientists couldn't ignore the deeper patterns. Measurements showed that the planet's ionosphere was thickening, its density rising by almost 3%, an impossible figure if not for an external energy input. The Earth, it seemed, was absorbing part of the resonance. Satellite imagery revealed that the day-night boundary, the terminator line, no longer moved with the same sharpness. It blurred at the edges, glowing faintly even on the dark side of the planet. The Earth now carried a low, persistent luminescence, not bright enough to see from the surface, but radiant in orbit, a living halo. At first, some feared it would disturb ecosystems, confuse migration, upset the balance of life. But the opposite happened. Plant growth rates increased slightly, ocean temperatures stabilized in certain zones, even atmospheric turbulence, long the chaos of climate, began to even out, as though the resonance wasn't just connecting, but correcting. Linnea's assistant stared at the data, shaking his head. "This isn't possible," he whispered. Linnea smiled faintly, her eyes on the glowing horizon. "Maybe it's not supposed to be possible," she said. "Maybe it's necessary." That night, for the first time since the signal appeared, no one could find a single lightning storm anywhere on Earth. The planet's energy, once restless and unpredictable, had fallen perfectly still, not lifeless, but balanced, breathing in harmony with something beyond it. And above it all, Three-Eye Atlas remained poised near Mars, still silent, still radiant, the golden arcs around it now dimmer but sharper, as if conserving energy for something yet to come. In its stillness, the object looked less like a comet and more like a heart suspended in space, a rhythm holding the universe together one pulse at a time. For Linnea, that realization came not as fear, but as peace, because for the first time she didn't feel like she was looking at something. She felt like she was inside it, part of the same pattern, the same breath, the same song that had begun long before humanity ever learned to listen. For a time, it felt like balance had been found. The skies glowed softly at night, The seas carried their quiet rhythm. Even the air seemed gentler, as though the planet had found its own pulse and chosen to keep it. But then, without warning, the rhythm changed. It wasn't dramatic. There were no flashes, no flares, no catastrophic break in the pattern. It was subtler, the kind of shift that only those who had been watching from the beginning could feel. The 5-3-2 sequence faltered, then stuttered, like a heartbeat skipping a single note. Linnea noticed it first while reviewing atmospheric telemetry. The waveform, once smooth and predictable, now carried a faint tremor, a flicker in amplitude, repeating every few cycles. At first she thought it was interference, perhaps solar wind, but the solar data was calm, too calm. And then she saw something she hadn't seen in weeks, a single sharp spike of radiation from near Mars. It was faint, focused, and coming directly from 3I Atlas. She froze. For months, the object had remained passive, its luminosity stable, its behavior consistent. Now, for the first time, it was active. The spike wasn't destructive, it wasn't even powerful enough to harm satellites, but it carried the same mathematical rhythm as the resonance, only inverted. Instead of 5-3-2, it was 2-3-5. A mirrored pattern. When Linnea overlaid the data, the result was hauntingly beautiful. The inverted signal meshed perfectly with Earth's ongoing pulse, like two halves of a phrase completing each other. It wasn't noise, it was response, but as the harmonics merged, new phenomena began to appear. The faint global glow that had softened nights for weeks now began to shimmer irregularly, sometimes fading faster, sometimes lingering longer, as if struggling to maintain equilibrium. The air carried a faint vibration again, lower, slower, almost mournful. Across the world, people began to notice subtle distortions in perception. Time, once steady, seemed to stretch. Clocks ran a little fast, then slow. The pauses between the pulses began to feel longer, not physically, but emotionally, as though the world was waiting for something that refused to arrive. At the observatory, Linnea replayed the inverted signal over and over. "This isn't an error," she whispered. Her assistant frowned. "Then what is it?" She hesitated, watching the two rhythms fold together. "It's a reflection, like a feedback loop between two mirrors." The idea terrified her. If 3I Atlas and Earth were locked in resonance, and that resonance was now beginning to fold back on itself, then every fluctuation, every echo, could amplify exponentially. But there was something else. When she slowed the inverted signal by a factor of 1,000, she noticed faint subharmonics beneath the main frequency, tones so low they almost vanished into silence. And within them, hidden like threads, were fragments of data that didn't belong. They weren't random, they were structured, sequences of prime intervals too precise for natural origin. Her assistant leaned in. "That looks like code." Linnea nodded slowly. "It's not a transmission, it's evolution." In that moment, 3I Atlas pulsed again, brighter, deeper, sending a ripple through space that reached Earth with a visible effect. For the first time, the auroras didn't follow the usual arcs. They coalesced into a single spiral above the Pacific, rotating slowly, like an iris focusing. The inversion pattern stabilized again, and for a few heartbeats, the world felt perfectly still. The kind of stillness that feels less like peace and more like inhalation. Then, without warning, the entire planet's resonance shifted down by one harmonic. Everything slowed. The sky dimmed, the glow receded, and in its place came something new. A deep, resonant tone that wasn't in any of the models. It wasn't random. It was counting down. When the first cycle of the lowered resonance completed, the instruments around the world fell quiet. No anomalies, no flares, no disruptions, just a steady, singular tone, vibrating through every layer of the planet's atmosphere. Linnea sat alone in the dim light of the observatory. The hum was so low she could feel it more than hear it, a pressure in the chest, a subtle trembling under her palms as they rested on the desk. Outside, the horizon shimmered faintly, the last of the auroral glow slipping into night. She adjusted the display on her monitor, zooming into the waveform of the most recent pulse. The countdown pattern, the shift to a deeper harmonic, wasn't random. Each descending tone aligned perfectly with one of the planet's natural resonances, the Schumann frequencies, those faint electromagnetic pulses that Earth has carried since its formation. It wasn't collapsing, it was synchronizing. The lower the harmonic dropped, the more stable the readings became. Seismic sensors quieted, magnetic fluctuations steadied. It was as if the planet were tuning itself, aligning its ancient heartbeat to something new and immeasurable. Her assistant returned from the equipment bay, eyes wide. "The subharmonics you found," he said. "They're changing." Linnea turned toward him. "Changing how?" "They're forming symmetry. You can actually map them now." He transferred the new data to her terminal. When the waveform appeared, her breath caught. It wasn't noise anymore. It was geometry. Across the spectrum of frequencies, the subharmonics now traced the shape of a torus, a continuous loop of energy folding back through itself. It was the same topology found in magnetic fields, in planetary cores, even in human hearts. She stared at the image in silence. "This isn't a countdown," she said finally. Her assistant frowned. "Then what is it?" "A calibration." As the hours passed, the resonance grew quieter, yet somehow more pervasive. The sky dimmed to velvet, stars sharpening until they seemed to hover closer to Earth. Even in urban centers, the air took on a new clarity, as if the atmosphere had thinned to transparency, letting the universe lean in. Linnea switched to deep spectral analysis. When she filtered out the background cosmic radiation, one narrow band remained, a signal so pure it cut through the noise like a breath through glass. It was faint but undeniably structured. When translated into sound, it resembled a chord, 3 tones in perfect harmony, resonating at frequencies corresponding exactly to the orbital paths of Earth, Mars, and 3i Atlas. Not a message, not even communication, a shared vibration, 3 bodies locked in mutual resonance. "This was never a warning," Linnea murmured. "It was rehearsal." The inverted sequence, the mirrored pulses, the countdown, they were not precursors to destruction, but steps in alignment. Each harmonic had drawn Earth closer to equilibrium, until the frequencies of space, planet, and consciousness aligned perfectly. Outside, the stars began to shift imperceptibly, their light bending ever so slightly, as though seen through water. For a brief, astonishing moment, the constellations themselves seemed to ripple. And then came something no one expected. The hum deepened, just once, and for a heartbeat, every electronic device across the planet went silent. No static, no signal, no interference, just silence. Perfect, absolute silence. In that stillness, for one suspended instant, humanity stood without noise, a global pause so complete that even the oceans seemed to hold their breath. Then, just as softly, the hum returned, not below the threshold of hearing anymore, but within it. A single note, resonating through air and skin alike, carrying a warmth that no instrument could measure. Across the observatory, lights flickered gently back to life. Linnea exhaled, tears stinging her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like recognition, like something immense had just finished speaking, and for the first time, Earth had understood. She turned to her assistant, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not coming," she said. "It's here." For hours after the harmonic alignment, the world stayed uncannily still. No magnetic storms, no sudden lights, just the faint hum, constant, gentle, threaded through everything. Linnea barely noticed the passage of time. The clock on the wall ticked, but each second seemed to stretch, not slower or faster, just smoother, as though time itself had become fluid. When she finally stepped outside, the world felt different. The stars were too sharp. Every point of light shimmered with an intensity that made the night sky look deeper than it had any right to be. It wasn't just visibility, it was presence. The stars didn't seem distant anymore. They felt near, as if the gap between the world and the cosmos had quietly collapsed. Astronomers across the globe began to notice the same thing. Telescopes calibrated to deep space observation suddenly recorded micro shifts in parallax. The stars weren't moving. The reference frame itself was changing. Space was bending subtly inward, not collapsing but folding closer. To the human eye, the effect was beautiful, endless clarity, like standing inside a crystal sphere. But to physicists, it was unthinkable. The local curvature of space-time had adjusted without any measurable increase in mass or energy. The only variable that had changed was the resonance. Linnea watched the live feed from one of the orbiting satellites. The Earth below glowed faintly, haloed in a soft silver light, the same hue now appearing in the air, at the edges of clouds, on the surfaces of lakes. It wasn't reflection, it was emission. When she analyzed the frequency of the light, her pulse quickened. It matched the new harmonic, a wavelength that didn't belong to any known atmospheric process. It was as if the planet had begun radiating its own faint luminescence, born not of sunlight but of resonance itself. For the first time in recorded history, day and night were no longer absolute opposites. The darkness now shimmered with low light. The daylight, though bright, felt softer, less blinding. Even shadows seemed thinner, more diffuse, as though the world was gently losing the sharpness that had once divided light from dark, moment from moment. Her assistant ran a systems check, eyes wide. "Linnea," he said, "it's not just the light. Our clocks, they're off again, but not randomly. They're syncing." Syncing to what? To each other, perfectly. Across the globe, every atomic clock, once drifting by nanoseconds each day, began ticking in perfect harmony. The time signal, once man-made, now resonated with the same frequency as the global pulse. Every second, every measurement, every heartbeat, all moving together. For centuries, humanity had tried to measure the universe. Now, the universe was measuring us. Outside, the auroras stretched farther still, now visible at the equator, tracing arcs of luminous violet that crossed the sky like brushstrokes. The colours shifted so slowly they seemed alive, pulsing faintly with each resonance. And for those watching without instruments, without theories, farmers, sailors, children standing barefoot in the night, there came a growing sense of recognition, like remembering a melody that had always been playing, too soft to hear until now. In cities, crowds gathered on rooftops, quietly staring upward. Some described the light as comforting, others as overwhelming, but everyone felt the same impossible sensation. The sky wasn't above them anymore, it was around them. Linnea's assistant whispered, "It feels like the stars are closer." She nodded, her voice barely audible. "They are. Space isn't expanding. It's listening." Then came the strangest discovery of all. When she slowed the resonance playback to 1/10,000th speed, the waveform revealed subtle amplitude modulations, tiny shifts that formed repeating geometric signatures identical to the lattice seen weeks before. But this time the shapes weren't planetary, they were molecular, hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, the pattern of life itself, now encoded in the cosmic rhythm. "It's reading us," she murmured. "No, it's remembering us." For a moment she closed her eyes and let the hum settle into her breathing. And in that silence, in that stillness between pulses, she realized the truth she had never dared to consider. The universe was never silent. We just hadn't been quiet enough to hear it. For 3 nights straight, the glow above Earth did not fade. It pulsed softly, like a living heartbeat, wrapping the planet in a shimmer too delicate for instruments to measure, yet too precise to be random. The hum had evolved again. Its wavelength carried harmonic overtones that painted the upper atmosphere with faint ribbons of light, slow and deliberate, as if tracing a message across the sky. At first, people thought they were auroras. Extraordinary, yes, but still natural. But as the patterns repeated, astronomers noticed something that sent a chill through every observatory. The light wasn't following magnetic fields, it was following coordinates. Across continents, observers mapped the luminous arcs, each one aligned with ancient structures, forgotten observatories, buried stone circles, and megaliths whose original purpose had been lost to time. From Stonehenge to the pyramids, from the Nazca Plateau to the temples of Angkor, faint lines of radiance connected site to site in a perfect global lattice. No human technology had made this alignment possible, and yet every point glowed, faint but certain, as though the Earth's surface had awakened an invisible circuit. Linnea sat before the live feed, transfixed. The model on her screen rendered the entire planet as a single geometric field, a perfect network of glowing threads converging toward one point. The point was Mars, or more precisely, the location of 3I Atlas, now just beyond the red planet's orbit. She whispered, "It's not broadcasting anymore. It's mirroring." The realization spread quickly through the scientific community. Every new pattern in Earth's sky was matched by a faint pulse reflected near Mars, like the universe itself was sketching two halves of the same design, one here, one there. Then came the color shift. What began as silver-white gradually turned to a deep violet, then indigo, then a hue no one could quite name, a tone of light that seemed to bypass the eye and settle directly into the mind. People began to dream in colors they had never seen before. Reports flooded social media of shared imagery, geometric spirals, fluid crystalline patterns, shapes that rotated without moving, all identical, all seen by thousands who had never met. The resonance wasn't just altering light anymore, it was communicating through consciousness itself. Linnea's instruments detected subtle electrical activity in the air, not lightning, but a steady, coherent oscillation identical to that found in human brainwaves. The planet was, by every metric, thinking. When she overlaid the frequencies of the atmospheric oscillation and the neural alpha band, they fit perfectly, like two halves of one signal, one cosmic, one biological. The implication was staggering. 3i Atlas hadn't just tuned the planet physically, it had synchronized its very perception. For the first time, humanity was sharing the same dream. Across the globe, the light forms coalesced into slow-moving waves, each crest rising in silent rhythm with the hum beneath the Earth. Satellite cameras showed the patterns converging, forming a massive spiral over the northern hemisphere. A spiral whose arms rotated counter to planetary spin, as though reversing the direction of time itself. Linnea leaned forward, barely breathing. The spiral's center, the still point, hovered directly over the magnetic North Pole. Within its heart, the colors dimmed, revealing a sphere of absolute darkness. Not black, not absence, but depth, an opening. Her assistant stared at the monitor. "It's like a window," he whispered. "No," Linnea replied, her voice trembling. "It's not a window, it's a reflection." She pulled up the latest readings from Mars orbit. The 3i Atlas data feed NASA had quietly locked behind encryption. Even so, independent astronomers had already mirrored the telemetry, and there it was, the same spiral pattern forming in the thin Martian atmosphere. Each rotation matched Earth's by fraction of a second. Two worlds breathing together, caught in one shared rhythm. It wasn't just light anymore, it was geometry, pure information, woven through space. And as Linnea watched, the spiral above Earth began to shift its form, the arms bending inward, folding through dimensions that the human eye couldn't fully follow. For a moment, the entire pattern collapsed into a single pulse of light. And then, impossibly, it reversed. The hum deepened. Every frequency across the planet dipped half an octave lower. Time itself seemed to slow, not dramatically, but perceptibly, as though the universe had taken a deep breath and was waiting to see what humanity would do next. Linnea stood there, surrounded by monitors flickering in soft violet. The data, the sound, the resonance, all converged into a single quiet realization. Whatever 3i Atlas was doing, it wasn't ending anything, it was preparing something. For the first time since the resonance began, the world fell utterly quiet. The hum still lingered, yes, but it had changed. It was slower, softer, shaped not like a signal but like a heartbeat carried through stone and water. And in that stillness, something new appeared. It began at the poles, faint shadows moving within the auroral spirals. They were not clouds, nor magnetic distortions. They were images, impossibly vast and fleeting. Some saw coastlines that no longer existed. Others swore they glimpsed forests where there was now only desert. But wherever the resonance touched, the past began to shimmer through the air. Linnea's team thought it was projection at first, an optical mirage caused by ionized particles refracting light. But when they overlaid satellite data with known geological maps, their breath caught in unison. The outlines matched precisely with extinct rivers, submerged continents, and ancient fault lines. The Earth was showing its own memory. At one observatory in Chile, a researcher captured a 30-second exposure that changed everything. Within the auroral light, faint silhouettes of enormous creatures appeared. Not myths, not imagination, but perfectly proportioned outlines of beings that walked the planet millions of years before. Each one flickered for a moment and vanished into the shimmering haze, like memories rising to the surface of a dream. Linnea stared at the images in disbelief. If the resonance could reach deep enough to replay geological history, then time itself wasn't linear. It was layered, stored, waiting. and 3i Atlas, whatever it truly was, had just found a way to read it. Across the planet, reports multiplied. In the Indian Ocean, satellites picked up faint arcs of light tracing the shape of ancient landmasses, the ghost outlines of Lemuria and Atlantis. In the American Southwest, petroglyphs carved into rock thousands of years ago began to glow faintly, their etchings pulsing in time with the harmonic rhythm. No technology could explain this. No natural process could link energy patterns in the upper atmosphere to light emerging from buried stone. But the data was there, cross-confirmed, measured, undeniable. The resonance wasn't random, it was intentional, and that intent seemed focused not on destruction or dominance but on connection, on weaving the story of the planet into something larger, as though every epoch were a single note in an eternal song. At dawn, Linnea stood outside beneath a violet sky. The light no longer scared her. If anything, it felt familiar, like the warmth of a childhood memory just beyond reach. Her assistant joined her, eyes wide. "Do you see that?" he whispered. On the horizon, faint beams of gold began to merge with the violet, light from the rising sun folding seamlessly into the resonance, as if dawn itself was being rewritten. Then the clouds began to move in impossible patterns, circles nested within circles, spirals interlocking in mathematical precision. It wasn't random weather, it was language. The resonance was drawing. Linnea rushed back to her console. When she translated the movement data into coordinates, the spirals resolved into an unmistakable structure, a map of the solar system, but not as it is, as it was. The inner planets appeared slightly shifted, their orbits marked with golden arcs, showing the configuration from billions of years ago, when Mars still had oceans and Earth's atmosphere was young. And at the outer edge, one more orbit glowed, faint, incomplete, broken in two halves. Something once there, now gone. A missing planet. Linnea felt her chest tighten. Could that be what 3i Atlas was tracing? A memory not of Earth, but of the solar system itself. A planet that had been destroyed, its fragments scattered across the stars, its memory carried in resonance, waiting for a world to understand. She leaned close to the screen, her reflection trembling in the glow. "Maybe," she whispered, "this is what it's been trying to show us all along." The hum deepened once more. Outside, the skies over both poles began to pulse in synchrony, each flicker of light echoing not across distance, but across time, every flash a heartbeat of history, every shimmer a fragment of memory. And for the first time in human history, Earth wasn't just watching the cosmos, it was watching itself. As the hours passed, the sky above the world became a living archive. The auroras no longer danced randomly, they moved with slow precision, like brushstrokes painting stories across the atmosphere. Each pulse of light carried an image, faint, momentary, but so human it hurt to look at. Across continents, people began seeing the same visions, faces formed from the shifting glow, not clear or literal, but impressionistic, as if drawn in light and motion rather than detail. A mother holding a child. A crowd gathered under a starry night, hands reaching upward towards something unseen. No two people saw exactly the same thing, but everyone felt it, the unmistakable sense of being remembered. Linnea watched from her observatory as faint figures began to appear in the sky above the northern horizon. They weren't spirits, nor projections. They were memories, patterns of collective experience somehow encoded in the electromagnetic fabric of the world. Every dream, every fear, every kindness humanity had ever sent into the air now shimmered in return. Her assistant leaned in close, his voice shaking. "It's showing us." She nodded slowly. "No, it's reflecting us." Scientists scrambled to interpret the data. Some believed the resonance had become self-referential, that the harmonic between Earth and 3i Atlas had formed a feedback loop strong enough to visualize information stored in the ionosphere itself. If true, it meant that every radio transmission, every signal, every heartbeat recorded by technology or nature was now echoing back in light. But Linnea sensed it wasn't technology doing this. It was recognition, a planetary mind learning to see itself. In every corner of the world, ancient structures glowed faintly under the resonance's influence. Temples, ruins, monuments, all resonating in sync, each one built around geometric ratios now mirrored perfectly in the harmonics pattern. For the first time it became clear, Those old architectures were not random art, they were instructions. When the resonance deepened again, the images shifted. Gone were the figures of the past, now came visions of possibility, cities blanketed in clean light, forests returned to their green glory, oceans glowing gently as if alive again. It wasn't a prophecy, it was a choice. Across social feeds, the tone changed. People who had been terrified began describing a strange sense of peace. Musicians began composing pieces that matched the resonance frequency. Children, listening in silence, could hum the exact tone without ever being taught. Humanity was synchronizing, not under control, but in awareness. Linnea's eyes welled with tears as she listened to the faint echo vibrating through the observatory walls. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It invited it. She whispered, "It's giving us a mirror and asking what we see." Outside, the clouds parted. Above the observatory, the aurora condensed into a single column of light stretching into the stratosphere. Inside it, fleeting shapes moved, not alien, not human, but familiar in a way beyond language. They resembled the forms of ancient constellations, the same ones humanity had drawn across the sky thousands of years ago. But now they moved, each constellation flowing into the next. Orion's belt bending toward Ursa Major, Lyra dissolving into the Pleiades. The stars themselves were being rewritten. The resonance wasn't just showing the past anymore, it was inviting the present to rewrite the future. Linnea whispered, "It's rewriting our sky." Her assistant exhaled, or maybe reminding us that it was never ours. As the light reached its brightest point, all the constellations merged into one enormous spiral. The same spiral that mirrored 3I Atlas's signature beyond Mars. It spun slowly, each arm glimmering with the soft pulse of a heartbeat. And then, for a brief, impossible instant, the spiral folded in on itself, and the entire night sky seemed to inhale. No explosion, no sound, just silence so complete it became sacred. When the light returned, the aurora was gone. The stars were still there, clearer, sharper, but the pattern above had changed forever. The night sky was no longer just a map of stars, it was a reflection of us. Linnea closed her eyes and whispered, "It remembered us. Now it's asking if we remember ourselves." All through that long night, the world breathed beneath a quiet sky. The spiral had dissolved, but its afterimage lingered in every lens, every eye that dared to look upward. It wasn't brightness that people remembered, it was presence. The sense that the universe had leaned close enough for us to hear its whisper, and then waited for an answer. And slowly, humanity began to answer. Not through governments or agencies, not through machines or declarations, but through something simpler, a shared instinct, unspoken yet universal. People began to sing. It started with one frequency, a note, low, fragile, carried on the wind near the Chilean observatories. Then another in Reykjavik, matching it by coincidence. Then dozens more. Within hours, sound maps showed clusters of people humming the same tone across the globe, different languages, different instruments, all synchronized to the planetary hum. Not planned, not organized, just felt. Linnea watched the global sound map evolve on her screen, a web of tones wrapping the earth like a heartbeat made of human voices. The resonance in the upper atmosphere began to change again, responding to the singing below. Its rhythm slowed to match the global tempo. For the first time, the planet wasn't echoing a cosmic signal. It was harmonizing with us. Her assistant whispered, "It's duetting." She smiled faintly. "It's listening." Then came something even stranger. At the exact moment when global resonance peaked, when the collective hum reached its softest, most unified tone, the light beyond Mars flickered again. 3I Atlas, unseen for weeks through the thick veil of cosmic dust, suddenly glowed brighter than it ever had before. Not erratic, not chaotic, responsive. Telescopes captured the change instantly, a pulse of deep crimson, then gold, then pure white, expanding outward before fading into a calm, steady shine. The object, once cold and inert, was now vibrating in perfect frequency alignment with Earth's own resonance. The signal bridge was complete. Linnea's instruments confirmed it. For the first time, energy wasn't just flowing to Earth, it was flowing between them. The harmonic data formed a simple structure, a rhythm so clean it almost felt mathematical. 3 pulses, a pause, 1 pulse, 2 pauses. It repeated over and over. Somewhere in that elegant pattern, Linnea recognized something deeply human, a question. She typed a single command, aligning the observatory's transmitter to match the resonance frequency. They couldn't project enough power to reach interstellar space, but perhaps, she thought, power wasn't the point. Intent might be enough. "Begin broadcast," she said. The signal rose, faint and steady, feeding into the harmonic wave now circling the planet. It wasn't speech or numbers, it was the simplest thing possible, the frequency of a human heartbeat, recorded, purified, sent skyward. Across the world, other observatories joined in. Soon the entire planet pulsed with synchronized rhythm, the echo of billions of hearts, each one contributing a fragment of warmth to the cold vastness of space. Minutes passed, then an hour, silence, and then a return. The beam from 3i Atlas shifted, not violently, not with light or force, but subtly, like the tightening of a breath. Its wavelength modulated downward, matching the heartbeat exactly. And in that moment, every instrument, every receiver, every human tuned in, heard a single tone emerge from the static. It wasn't words, it wasn't language, it was emotion. A sound halfway between music and memory, as though the cosmos had exhaled something it had held for eons, a sigh of recognition, or maybe gratitude. Linnea wiped her eyes. Her assistant whispered, "What does it mean?" She smiled through her tears. "It means it heard us." Outside, the night shimmered once more, not with fire or brilliance, but with reflection. Each star in the sky seemed to breathe, as though the whole of existence had softened. Even the hum began to fade, replaced by the natural sounds of wind and distant waves. The conversation was over, but the connection remained, quiet, invisible, unbreakable. When dawn finally broke, the world looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. The sky was clear, unremarkable. The hum had vanished. 3i Atlas hung silent beyond Mars, its once blazing glow now dimmed to a pale thread of light lost among the stars. But something deep within the Earth, and within the people who had listened, had shifted. At first, scientists tried to explain the measurable traces, tiny residual harmonics in the magnetosphere, a subtle alteration in the Schumann resonance, brainwave synchronizations recorded in medical devices worldwide. They could measure the effects, but not the cause. Linnea didn't rush to explain anything, she simply listened. Her observatory was quiet, except for the sound of her own breathing. The screens flickered with low data streams, each reading slower and softer than before. Her assistant approached, whispering, "It's like the signal's still there, just inside everything." And he was right. Bird migrations shifted a few degrees north. Ocean currents, for reasons no model could predict, began to move in more stable circular flows. Seeds sprouted faster under certain wavelengths of light, the same wavelengths that once carried the resonance. It was as if nature itself remembered the frequency, even people felt it. In the days that followed, countless stories surfaced, those who claimed they could sense the heartbeat of the planet in moments of stillness, others who swore that music now sounded deeper, colours more vivid, dreams more coherent. The world wasn't louder, it was clearer, as though the noise had been peeled away, leaving only truth behind. Linnea sat beneath the observatory dome one night, watching Mars glint faintly through the telescope lens. 3i Atlas had not moved for several days, its orbit stabilized in a way no comet ever had, no tumbling, no trailing ice, just stillness. It wasn't leaving, it was staying. She ran the thermal scans again, but the readings made no sense. The surface temperature fluctuated too evenly, as if something inside was regulating it. A pulse, faint but rhythmic. Breathing. Linnea whispered to herself, "You heard us, and you stayed." In that quiet moment, the thought didn't frighten her, it comforted her. Because maybe this was never an invasion, nor an observation, nor even a test. Maybe it was a reminder, a cosmic mirror showing humanity what connection truly meant. And perhaps the message had been simple all along. The universe was not waiting for us to reach it. It had already reached us. Days turned into weeks. The silence endured. But everywhere, in ways no one could have anticipated, humanity began to act differently. Disputes that had dragged for decades found unexpected resolution. Nations began cooperating on data sharing without demand or politics. Even on social networks, something subtle had changed. Fewer arguments, more wonder. It wasn't perfection, just a quiet shift toward coherence, as if the world had inhaled together and for once chosen not to exhale in anger. Linnea wrote her final report to the global consortium. Resonance ceased at 0412 UTC, but global coherence persists. Recommend no attempt to reinitiate contact. If the signal was a message, it was received. She paused, watching the night sky through the glass. 3i Atlas shimmered once, just once, before fading behind the red halo of Mars. And in that instant, she understood something beyond science. It wasn't silence, it was listening, and this time, the listening was ours. Months passed. The resonance had become a story, half science, half myth. Most of the world moved on. The skies returned to their usual silence, and 3 Atlas became just another catalogued object in the data streams, a faint dot in orbital charts, its mystery sealed by official reports and public disinterest. But Linnea never stopped listening. Night after night, she returned to the observatory long after her team had gone home. The machines hummed quietly, their sensors still locked on the patch of sky just beyond Mars. Most nights yielded nothing, just the static rhythm of solar wind, the soft rustle of a sleeping universe. But on the 103rd night, something changed. At first, she thought it was interference, a faint blip, barely distinguishable from cosmic noise. But then it repeated. 4 pulses, a pause, 1 more pulse. Linnea froze. She ran the playback. The timing was too deliberate, too precise to be natural, and the frequency, the same wavelength as the global resonance months earlier. Her heart pounded as she triangulated the source, not from deep space, not even from 3i Atlas itself. The signal came from behind Mars, from the exact trajectory the comet had once followed before slowing. Something else was there, something stationary, waiting. She increased the receiver's sensitivity. The signal deepened, clearer now, and then came the modulation. Not random data, not noise. It was harmonic, a perfect, rising tone, one that mirrored the same structure Earth had sent during its heartbeat broadcast. Her assistant, long retired from the project, joined her on a late-night call. "Could it be an echo?" he asked. Linnea shook her head. Echoes don't learn the rhythm. For hours they listened. The tone continued. Soft, patient, alive. Then, at 0314 UTC, it stopped. Silence. Linnea leaned closer to the monitor, feeling her pulse sync with the fading data stream. Then the static shifted once more, and a single pulse echoed through the feed. Long, slow, deliberate. Not data, not a pattern, just one sound. Her assistant whispered, "What is it?" Linnea smiled faintly. "It's our frequency." The signal was a perfect replica of the human heartbeat Earth had once sent, but this one was different. The amplitude was higher, as if strengthened, refined. The hum that followed wasn't random either. It carried overtones that matched the planet's current resonance. Earth's new baseline frequency. Whatever had sent this signal, it was responding in our language. Linnea felt something rare, not fear, not awe, but recognition. The connection wasn't technological anymore, it was biological. 2 worlds, 2 consciousnesses, finally sharing the same rhythm. She turned off the main lights. The observatory bathed in starlight. Outside, the sky shimmered faintly, not bright, just alive. Each star flickered in rhythm with the faint hum coming through the speakers. Her assistant's voice trembled. "Do we answer?" Linnea took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the faint glow beyond Mars. She thought of the silence, the harmony, the shared breath between humanity and the unknown. The universe had always been vast, but perhaps it had never been empty. "Not yet," she said softly. "Let it listen a little longer." They watched as the pulse faded into the static of the cosmos. Then, almost imperceptibly, a new sound rose. A single ascending note that grew softer, warmer, and then disappeared completely. No grand finale, no explosion, just quiet understanding. Linnea closed her notebook and whispered to the dark, "We were never alone. We were just waiting to remember how to say hello, and high above the red horizon of Mars, a faint shimmer moved. Not away, not closer, but parallel. As if the cosmos had decided not to leave, but to walk beside us for a while longer. The hum never returned. But sometimes, on the coldest, clearest nights, radio receivers still catch a whisper, a single rhythmic beat, soft as breathing, steady as life. No one calls it a signal anymore. They just call it what it feels like, the sound of something listening back,